welcome to Adventures in AI, where the Insight Flow team members share things that have caught our attention over the past week and talk about our own experiences in the world of AI. I'm Giles.
I'm Rich.
And I'm Graham. And this week we were musing when we were talking about various things AI, about the fact that we keep on saying that jobs like management consultants will be, if not eradicated, slightly replaced by AI. And given that we've all done management consultancy type things in the past, we thought it would actually be quite fun to have a look at the reality of that statement and look through the various things that management consultants do or might do, and to see possibly the state of the nation as far as AI is concerned around that, and working them through. And the first area is that we thought about looking at was audit. So perhaps, Giles, you'd want to describe how the audit part of a management consultancy's life might be being replaced by AI.
Yeah, sure. So I think, I kind of think of this as project Say Goodbye to Mckinsey. And if you think about breaking down the different things that consultancies do, the start of a lot of projects is a sort of audit process. It's not always formal audit. Quite often, if you're doing a strategy project, for example, it might be just going around and asking people a bunch of questions. And so there's an element of needing to go in and have a look at all of the information that the client has from across different teams, different parts of the organization, etc. So there's a data gathering element. And then from that, you tend to go through a sort of analysis and synthesis phase. So analyze the data, understand what it's telling you, synthesize it, create some insights from it and all that sort of thing. And that starts to build a view of, if it's a strategy project, what the strategy is. If it's a technology transformation project, then how you might go about transforming. So you'd usually be asking a load of questions about, what's the existing technology stack, for example, if it's tech transformation, or what current strategies have different departments got. If it's a strategy project, obviously there's a whole load of different types of things you could do. But it struck me that, if you think about that, gathering data, analyzing and synthesizing, then actually an AI can do a lot of that for you. So the gathering data part, it could actually potentially, if it's given access to the right things, go off and find relevant things for you. It could do analysis to answer specific questions, and then synthesize that data into some insights. So I would say, on the audit side of things, actually, it has even now, that's a process that you could largely automate with some support from the client. So as long as they're prepared to, put a couple of people on pulling stuff together and putting it in the AI, then it feels to me as if that's eminently doable.
So I've been thinking a little bit about audit, possibly in a more traditional sense. And a disclaimer here, I used to be an auditor. And I think all of my ex-audit colleagues would be the first to admit that actually being an auditor feels a little bit like being a dentist, in that nobody's happy to see you and they're always afraid that you're going to find a problem that they didn't know about. And part of the problem with this is audit is always done usually done in arrears, so to speak. So that's after the fact. So if it's a human audit, it's kind of looking back and checking to see if you've made any mistakes. But if we start to integrate kind of AI audits into normal business processes, you can do this continually as you go along. So instead of looking to see what mistakes you've made and trying to learn from them, usually up to it can be like a year later, for example, it's making sure that you don't make any mistakes in the first place. And that's correcting you as you go along. And that's a lot nicer feeling, I guess, as a person being audited, rather than having someone looking over your shoulder, checking up on you at the end of the year. It's somebody that can assist you going along. What AI is really good at now is, if we think about audit in terms of gathering and looking at data, I think for a long time we've been able to do as humans, quantitative analysis. And the qualitative stuff's actually, it can be harder in the sense that you don't have kind of a full suite of programs to help you like you might have with Power BI, Excel. And when I first started consulting, it was amazing just to get like a sentiment analysis that was like a word chart of kind of the most common words and phrases that were said. But now with AI, we can do a lot more qualitative analysis and very, very quickly as well. And you benefit from that one source that's analyzing it, whereas previously you'd usually quite likely have a team of humans that would be analyzing something qualitatively, and that always throws up some kind of peculiarities in terms of who thinks things are more important, when it can just be because that's the thing that you've looked at and haven't looked at what somebody else has been analyzing.
So around that the sort of initial data gathering that a management consultancy might do, and actually, to be fair, I mean, we're likely to be slightly not rude about the management consulting world, or less rude than other people are, but I think it's fair to say that the counterpoint to that is a lot of the management consultancy behaviours are things that normal businesses should actually be doing anyway. But do we believe around that idea of audit, of data collection, of working out what it is that a business already knows, where they're at and where they've got to in their thinking, that the current state of Gen AI is actually pretty good at doing it, and this idea that we're starting to replace functions is true?
Yeah, I think so. Definitely. They did, I think it was Harvard did a study where they actually got a number of students and sort of MBA type students, so people who had experience in business, to do ideation. So they were trying to come up with potential strategies for a business. So it was the sort of thing you would do in a consulting project. And then they got them to vote on the ideas that had come out as a way of sort of testing which ones they felt were likely to be the most successful. So it's not a completely perfect test, but essentially what came out was that disproportionately they chose the ideas that the AI came up with over the ones that group had come up with. And bear in mind, these are top end, top percentile intelligence. And the AI was still beating them on kind of coming up with ideas based on a relatively small amount of input data. So I do think, if you think about that analysis, synthesis, insight generation thing, AI is actually very good at it already, and will, I'm sure, only get better.
I think it's worth pointing out as well where maybe AI struggles, and I think I'm actually being a little bit unfair here because humans struggle with this too. And it's this idea of it can process huge amounts of information, but it struggles in thinking more abstractly. And an example of this would be if you've got a potential trading strategy that you want to test, and you know what that strategy is. That's relatively easy as a human. You can, even today, I think anybody listening to this could talk to ChatGPT and they could write a very simple program for you to test that based on historical data. But if you were approaching that problem where I've got all of the data, but I don't know which trading strategy I want to test, that becomes exponentially more harder for an AI, but kind of also for a human as well. And following that theme of, okay, let's look at trading strategies. A kind of an abstract example might be the market does better when it's a sunny day. It's like it's actually something that might be related because people are, I don't know, more optimistic. But there's so many more variables when you're just pushing data towards AI and not kind of prodding it into the right areas to look, that it kind of becomes harder. And it's always, I think, going to be beholden to humans to some degree to do that kind of prodding and saying, no, these are the things that are probably going to yield results if you start looking into them.
So I suppose one of the things then is the AGI concept. So, the general intelligence as opposed to more specific. And I think, what you've been talking about, I guess, is mainly large language models and how those are trained and how you can make them specific. But actually, if the rumors around OpenAI and their Q-Star project are true, then the promise of sort of artificial general intelligence is getting closer. And in that situation, it would be the AI that would be coming up with the ideas of, well, where else should I look? What other kind of sources of data should I be going out and finding? And what therefore is the breadth of, if you like, well, if we're talking specifically about audit, what's my list of questions going to be to the organization to say, can I have a look at this? And if you think about one of the main limitations of an audit in a consultancy at the moment, it's actually just that data gathering part. Is how much they can get through for the amount that the company's been prepared to pay for the project. So they're constrained very much by human resources at that point. And actually, if you can remove that bottleneck and remove the constraint, and so your only real constraint is access and processing power, then it does change the game completely, and it means that you can be much more comprehensive in the audit process.
And in all these things, as we're talking about them, you guys are both talking about current state of AI. There's no, it might be able to do this, or looking forward in the future, this is where we expect it to go.
I think from my side, a little bit of what could you build rather than what has been built already, but in terms of what could you build with AI as it is at the moment, rather than what could you build with AI as we expect it to be in 2 years' time. Mainly because it's moving so quickly that I couldn't even predict what it's going to be doing in 2 years' time.
Cool. So that's the sort of the understanding the context and perhaps working out what lines of inquiry to take and all the rest of it. That crucial first part of any management consulting engagement. One of the things I think that most management consultancies would say is that part of their role is to induce change. They've been asked in to help solve either particular problems or perhaps more generic problems, or to give a direction of travel and to start to help a company work out what its next X years looks like. So that idea of sort of creating impetus and how humans might go about it. This is a second stage then. Is this an area that AI is currently helping us, or is this something that we might look to it to do in the future?
So I think this one's much harder for AI. And I think the fundamental reason I'd say is AI is passive currently. So, notwithstanding sort of experiments and things that have been done around agents, then as a general rule, an AI will answer questions or will respond to requests that you make of it, but it won't actually actively do things on your behalf. And certainly, if you think about what does that role of being an agent of change or creating impetus in a project actually look like, or within an organization? A lot of it is actually a combination of structure, so setting up meetings and things that make things move forward, so getting the right people in the room. It's also a little bit of mentoring, a bit of advice, and helping people to achieve things that internally that they would struggle to do on their own. And so a lot of those are, I would say, quite deeply human to human. Now that said, I think there are some specific roles that you could look at in here. So I mentioned mentoring, and actually I think there's a real role for AI to be a kind of no embarrassment mentor, where you could ask it questions about, well, what should I do here, or and if it has access to a whole knowledge base that relates to that particular type of project or change or whatever it is that the consultancy is helping with, then you can almost have an always-on advisor who's there and can answer your questions and can give you advice. And that actually could become a core part of the change agency. I also think, and this is a project that we're involved in at the moment, actually, where if you provide resources that the AI has access to and can produce materials from that, so if you take tasks lists, or if you take policy documents, or a strategy document, for example, then if you've got a load of templates and things like that the AI can use to start building those materials, then arguably you don't need people to do that. And that would also be true of things like putting together, meeting agendas and doing the minutes of meetings, and scheduling, or saying what kind of schedule of meetings you should have. So there's a whole load of things that are, if you like, the more practical end, and for many consultants, the more boring end of the work that needs doing, which AI could potentially help with, I think.
I think having that kind of constant mentor and having AI as somebody that can constantly help you through change is actually really important, because often I've found in organizations that I've worked in, people know the change that needs to happen, but very often it doesn't get done, or it gets done very slowly. And the reason is we're all too busy with our day jobs, and there's a kind of a hump of resistance in terms of change, in that while you're learning how to do it differently, you might not be doing it as well, or you might be taking longer than doing it in ways that you could do previously. And we're all sometime or other under time constraints, and it's really easy to fall back to the old ways of doing things. And I think being able to have that constant help will help to eliminate that kind of that hump, and help to smoothen out transitions towards changing how you're operating.
Does that mean that the sort of in the office function that a management consultant might expect in a client's office starts to be replaced? This idea that they're there for people to talk to, they're there for people to ask advice of, starts to get replaced by AI.
Yeah, and we're actually seeing that in some of the work that we're doing. So Giles has mentioned this idea of having a mentor, and I think one of the main benefits personally for having kind of AI mentors is this idea of there's no stupid questions, or at least you're not embarrassed in asking a stupid question. And so what we've been working on at the moment is it's kind of a mentor consultant around diversity and inclusion. And that area in particular is one where you can be scared to ask questions because you're scared of saying the wrong thing. And AI really helps with this. Actually, it's this kind of safe space for you to learn and grow, that you can kind of access at any time.
I think one of the things I find really interesting about that area particularly is the process of formulating the question to ask the AI actually helps you understand the problem. So a lot of the time, I know this in terms of software development, where I'll formulate a question, and probably about 30 to 40% of the time after I've formulated the question, I know the answer. And it's just because it forces you to think about it in a specific way. So I think that in itself actually does act as an agent of change. I think the other thing, which I didn't say earlier, was, the concept. So part of change is changing habits. And you kind of touched on this, Rich. So the element of changing habits is something that if you've got a team of consultants in, they will only do so much, because usually the project finishes before the change is complete. And that becomes a real challenge for organizations, because you need really that continuous, I suppose it's reminders or impetus behind the change. And this is an area where I think it'd be really interesting to look at, can you design AI so it's more proactive, because at the moment it's passive, and actually make it generate at least the content that you then pushed to people on a regular basis. So you may say, depending on the change that you're trying to make, if it's, for example, getting someone to use a system that they weren't using before, or if it's running reports and checking those, then you could get the AI to help with the reminders and with the here's some advice on what I've seen having run the report for you, kind of thing. So if you're, let's say, doing some analysis. So I think there's a range of different things that an AI could potentially help with, but it does that part in particular requires a change from a kind of chat-based model to a different way of interacting with the large language models, which we haven't really seen much of yet.
Is the reason that we've not seen this yet the fact that the technology isn't quite there, or that people haven't thought to deploy it and use it in that way?
So I think ChatGPT's been so successful that people have been focusing on the chat interface. And so there isn't, as far as I'm aware, the technology so it's not particularly hard to build the technology to do it. But as far as I'm aware, there aren't kind of existing libraries or existing kind of implementations that I've seen that are designed to do that beyond what we've seen with agents. And this is kind of AI agents as opposed to people. But it's what we haven't really seen is this concept of an always-on agent, and that it doesn't actually require any AI to do that. It requires some software that sits around the AI that manages the schedule of how often it interacts and things like that. So it's not particularly, I don't think, particularly hard to build, but it's just no one is, either because they don't think it'll be useful or because they haven't thought of it yet.
And actually, I think that the most difficult part of that, it's just finding a right way for an organization to integrate that into kind of processes and systems that they're using at the moment, so that it is really easy and it is a reminder for them to kind of go into it and ask when they need to.
So I do think there's a user experience element to it, in terms of understanding. So where should that live? Is it in, if you've got an existing task management system, does it live in there? So would it be, for some organizations, Jira? For some organizations, it might be in your email system or your kind of personal productivity tool set. So I think there's some questions that would need to be answered about where it gets integrated into the workflow.
But it seems to me, listening to you, that actually you're describing general problems. I mean, this isn't specifically a how does and Gen AI get used to replace management consultants. I think it seems to me that management consultants would ask exactly the same types of questions.
So if you're thinking about an agent of change specifically, then that agent needs to have enough of an understanding about the specific kind of change in order to be useful. So if it's not just a set of scheduled reminders, which is not really what I'm talking about, then what you need it to be doing is intelligently responding to what's happened over the last few days and the data that's been generated and whatever else is useful, and using that to then generate a prompt of some sort to the human to say, have a look at this. This has changed. You need to kind of be aware of it, for example, which are the kind of things that that a consultant would be able to do. They might listen, they might just say, how's it going? And through that conversation, sort of find out what is actually happening, and then suggest some changes. Obviously, the AI could ask the human, how's it going? Which is a kind of very simplistic way of doing it. But I think there's more sophisticated things that it could be doing, looking at the data that's been created through the work that's been going on. And having that kind of constant review of what's happening, I think, could be really useful if done correctly.
So that's a lot about the where a business is at part of the management consultancy process, and a certain amount of how we make the change. And one of the I think most people would think of management consultancies as one of the things they do is talk about or work out what a business needs to do and what it actually is. And I know that they'll base it on their own experience. They'll use case studies. They'll look at how other businesses and sectors are doing it and bring those into the conversation, and feel that that's an incredibly important part that they as outsiders can bring into an organization. Is this possible currently with AI?
Yeah, so I think this this is actually really interesting, and it comes back to this idea that we've talked to before about sharing your data with AI, and I think you're right. One of the really huge benefits of getting human consultants in is that they have worked on lots of other organizations, probably in your sector, because you're working with a team that's that's specific to that sector, and they can see what's worked in other companies and they can see what hasn't, and then they can apply those to what you need to do to kind of improve or implement going forwards, and that's incredibly useful. I think if we start thinking about this idea of actually AIs are going to be consultants, it depends a little bit on how you implement that. If you implement that purely internally, in terms of that the things that you want the AI to look at in terms of data and to help you with, actually it starts to beg the question, where does it then get kind of cross-market information of what other organizations are doing? And so I think this is potentially going to be a challenge for companies, depending on how they implement AI consultants. And there's potentially a middle ground here of, if you can bring on board human consultants that work with AI to help you do that, then actually you can start to marry this idea of you're getting people in that will understand processes that have worked in other organizations in terms of how they set up the AI, the kind of things to look at. But then you're also getting kind of the benefits of having an AI always on consultant that kind of we've been talking about.
So under that model, does that then suggest that you don't need such smart consultants and that the AI can be the smart one and they're just driving?
Funnily enough, I'm of the impression that in say 10 years time, the only difference between if you get human consultants in versus if you do it via an AI is going to be who's asking the computer. Because I think consultancies are going to move towards this model anyway.
Yeah, I think, I mean, it's interesting that there's, first of all, the argument that, you get the A team selling in a project and then the B team delivers it, or to put it another way, whoever happens to be on the bench gets put in the project team, and then they're suddenly the expert on the thing that the project is about. Now, that's obviously cynical and doesn't happen at all in any consultancy that I've ever worked in. But moving swiftly on, but I do think that, so if you kind of break this one down into the practical things of what you would need to do, there are models that already exist in consulting for how to kind of take industry expertise and make it, almost package it up into a product. So a typical example would be something like a benchmark, which a consultancy puts together to say, okay, as a company, you're benchmarking here on these things and there on the other things. So it might be like a maturity model, or it might be a profitability model, or all of those sorts of things, whereby working with a number of different companies and gathering data from all of them, you can actually package up that expertise. So essentially then what you're talking about is a knowledge base that the AI has access to. So I think the immediate challenge that an organization would have is, how do I build that knowledge base in such a way that I'm not sharing secrets that I shouldn't be sharing between organizations, but I am giving the value that I need to give. And that, I think, is going to be quite challenging. And I suppose in a way it's something that we've been thinking about in Insight Flow for a while. Is what are the processes for managing those one-way mirrors, if you like, between different organizations.
It actually reminds me a little bit of kind of the market surveys that are done, where if you contribute your data, you get access to the results.
Yeah, exactly, and that's that's how it's done at the moment. And I think for me, the question on this one is, how can you leverage the power of AI to go beyond that sort of structured survey and onto a much more fluid conversational sort of set of relationships that you have with different organizations that then feed into a broader knowledge base. So, where I think it gets really interesting is if you've got the concept of a mentor who's always asking questions and always helping out, and you have, as a consultancy, kind of almost constant eyes and ears inside an organization if you have that kind of relationship with them, and you're continually delivering value to them, but you can build that value into something that is then available to the others. That those two things combined could, I think, become a really powerful solution for both the consultancy, but probably more so for a client, because they can't afford to have the consultants in all the time, but they could potentially afford to have the digital tools that the consultancy provides in.
There's an interesting aspect of the data sharing and what have you. It strikes me as I'm listening to you that when we employ management consultants, rather than being management consultants, we don't really ask the question too much about whether we're paying for them to learn more about our sector. We effectively are giving them more expertise, more claim for expertise on our sector by employing them, that they will undoubtedly, because they can't not, deploy for their next engagement, possibly with our competitors. I mean, there's obviously core secrets that won't go, or one hopes won't go, and the idea of NDAs and those sorts of things are very powerful. But there's a core experience, and we never really questioned this. I don't think I've ever heard anybody say we're not going to employ this management consultancy because they'll get to know a little bit more about our industry. In fact, the reverse is true. We employ management consultancies largely because they do have some expertise that they've obviously gained elsewhere about our industry or their area of speciality. So it's an interesting piece there. It seems to me that there's actually kind of a double standard that we're talking about here. That there's, on the one hand, there's the standard that we hold traditional management consultancies and our approach to engaging management consultancies to. On the other hand, we're saying, but AI, and we're going to be giving them data, and we're going to be giving them information and what have you. And that's something that we need to think about.
Actually, if you think about how you as a consultant go to pitch for a potential contract, usually the start of that conversation, at least, is you go in and you have a chat about their industry, and you're basically trying to tell them all why you know so much about it. So this idea of actually that becomes the selling point, that you do know a lot about the industry. It actually, in human consulting world, that seems to massively override this fear that actually they're going to learn a lot about us that they can pass on.
Yeah, and I think ultimately it's what are they buying from the consultancy, and a lot of that is confidence. So that it's confidence that they will actually get what they need to get done, and so part of that confidence comes from, have you done this thing before? Part of it is, do you understand the kind of business that we are as a client? And certainly in my experience, every business is unique in their eyes, but actually you see a lot more in common between companies, particularly in the same sector, than you see different. And there are some subtleties in culture and some of the rules. Some of the policies and things in different organizations are different, which actually, if you think about it as the operating model for the business is usually slightly different, and they each have, or you would hope it is, because they each have different strengths and weaknesses, and that's how they compete with each other and differentiate themselves from each other. But a lot of the things are very similar from one company to another, and so as a consultancy, you're definitely bringing that expertise from one to the next.
And in the terms of this conversation, of asking the question, does AI replace consultancy? What we're saying then is that an AI with an appropriate knowledge base has the potential to, at least in that first introductory phase, say, I know enough about X to be credible as a management consultancy into your business.
Yeah, and I think so. I would expect to see if AI does start to get used for this kind of thing, that it would be the productized versions of certain elements of the consulting offer. So if you have a kind of axis of highly bespoke versus highly kind of commoditized in terms of what you're doing as a consulting project, then the highly bespoke stuff will always stay human driven, but the highly commoditized. So if a consultancy specializes in a particular type of project and they do it again and again and again, then that, I think they would be able to automate much more of it using AI than the ones that are kind of tailored to every organization.
And this is a situation where many of the consultancies do run on a very highly prescribed process, and one might suggest that that's a feature that's more obvious the bigger the organization gets, the bigger the consulting organization gets. Therefore, the more likely that highly described, highly understood process could be repeated, and repeated in AI becomes more likely.
And I think there's kind of a hierarchy of kind of contact as to having an AI consultant or humans bringing it in AI or just going straight to a human. And so we've talked about earlier about mentor, AI having AI as a mentor, for example. So if a human talks to the AI and it hasn't got the answer that it needs to, there's probably going to be something built into that AI that then can go out and say, actually, you need to speak to this person, and then kind of there can be that human touch point as well. So I think in terms of bringing external perspectives into companies, it's not just a kind of one size fits all approach. There'll be the right appropriate level of human and AI interaction depending on what the issues are.
I find the external perspective element of consultancies slightly amusing. Only that the reason, yeah, this is the cynic in me potentially, but certainly from what I've seen in a number of organizations, if you think of so another way of describing the external perspective is thought leadership. And so a lot of organizations, consultancies, talk about their thought leadership and try and demonstrate that they know where the industry's a particular industry is going better than the companies that are in the industry do. And they put out thought leadership, or it might be, in other examples, it might be a particular kind of technology. So we know where blockchain's going better than anyone else, or we know where AI is going better than anyone else. So if that external perspective that a company's bringing in is thought leadership, in my experience in most consultancies, thought leadership is the kind of marketing thing that's done on the side of the desk, and every now and again you get told, right, you have to do some thought leadership, or you have to host something or whatever, and some partners love doing that kind of thing, some don't, but what you'll see is a fairly sporadic generation, or you'll see kind of periods of intensive thought leadership when they need more business, and then periods of very little development of thought leadership when they have enough business. But that in itself, I think, represents a real opportunity for AI, actually, because generating thought leadership on a more continuous basis and leveraging what you're learning from projects for thought leadership actually is something that an AI could do in the background all the time. And so I think for me that again is an area where it could be helpful. Again, there's quite a few hurdles to overcome, similar to kind of more general, how do you bring expertise from one project to another? Bringing it into thought leadership does require some humans to drive things, but it could potentially take 10 times or 100 times less effort than it currently does to produce thought leadership.
Yeah, you're right. And it's funny, actually. So with thought leadership, you're right. You've done all the hard work, and that's in terms of working with clients and to kind of see what problems they're facing. And the relatively easier work is trying to collate that into something that's useful to the market. But it's that issue of time, and I know that we've probably all been in that situation where maybe at the end of a project there's a really valuable opportunity to look at what we've learned, what we can add, what we can share with the market. But then the next project instantly comes up, and then you're kind of head down busy in that, and it just doesn't get done.
And I do think the best time to build thought leadership is at the end of a project when you've solved a particular problem for a client, and you can then talk about it knowledgeably because you've been in it. And a lot of consultancies have a process that they do at the end of a project to try and gather that knowledge, but actually it's a very cursory process generally because it's not built, and so therefore it's that side of the desk thing again. So it might be, okay, well, we'll put a case study together, or we'll write up a report and the team will do a debrief, and that's kind of it. But that doesn't involve organizing all of the materials from the project in such a way that if anyone were looking at it again in the future to find out what happened and what was learned, it wouldn't include all of that sort of work. So that piece is almost always lost.
So if we're thinking about the topic of this podcast and the questions we were asking ourselves at the beginning is, are we about to say goodbye, Mckinsey? And I suppose the question I'd ask you, just a thought process. It says, and you just mentioned it, Giles, about billing. I said, what percentage of the billable effort for management consultancy projects will be handled by AI in, say, 2 years?
I think so in 2 years, I would say not a massive amount. So maybe 10 or 15%, or it actually. So there's two ways of looking at it. One is how much of consultants' time will be freed up by using AI, and therefore how productive can they be on a project. And I think I would expect to see a sort of 30 to 50% uplift in consultant productivity. Whether that translates into changes in billing, I'm not sure. It might mean that consultancies suddenly become massively more profitable. So that's a possibility. But I also think that the consultancies that embrace this will be the ones that are still around in 5-10 years' time. And the ones that find it hard to adjust to more of a product pricing model than a bodies and hours pricing model will struggle.
I think from a pricing perspective as well, I think there's probably a natural inclination to think as a company, if I'm getting an AI consultant in, I want to spend less money than if I was getting human consultants in. And I think that's generally based around people's assumptions of what AI can and can't do at the moment. I think at the moment people would always go with this idea of humans are more competent, and I don't necessarily think that's always the case, like even today. But I think that's a kind of an expectation of what people will think in terms of prices. But then if you kind of move the conversation over towards the fact that, okay, you can get humans in for 3 months, or you're getting a continuous AI consultant, actually, I think the values there probably start to even out a lot more. Because even if you say that, if you maybe falsely assume that you're not getting the competence because you're going for AI, that benefit of having it always around, I think actually bumps the value up.
So I also think the idea of having knowledge bases that are continually added to, improved, updated by the consultancy based on their expertise. So actually their role becomes more as a curation of expertise, tactics, techniques. It's all of the stuff that enables an organization to do it themselves. That then becomes where the value is. And so it's less about the actual AI itself and more about what you feed into the AI to make it smarter. And I think so that's quite different, I think, to just having an AI.
to wrap up and to think about this, I mean, what we're saying here is that there are large chunks of even at the current level, there are large chunks of stuff that management consultancy do that can be productively and cost effectively replaced by AI. So if we're looking at the traditional model, there's already a large amount, and that is likely to continue to be true, and for that input from the AI to grow. But the second part of it is, and I think in some ways the more interesting part of it is actually we're also talking about a different view of what consulting looks like, and takes it away from a project-based, hour-based approach to something that is delivering value for more of the time in more integrated ways for the organisation for whom the consulting is being done.
Yeah, very much so. And I think that is a very different way of thinking about it. So culturally, for a consultancy, could be a challenge for them to get their heads around how to make it happen, because so much of it is about gathering and curating data in such a way that it can be used by an AI, which is not what they do in their day jobs at the moment. So I would say certainly it's a possible future. Whether it's actually the consultancies that lead the way in delivering this or other organizations, I'm not sure, honestly.
I think interestingly with consultancies, potentially at the start at least, I could see this change kind of almost happening behind the scenes in terms of they're internally changing how they do their consultants roles in terms of gathering information, using AI to help them. But you kind of the client just sees the human front of that. So I think kind of that will potentially happen first before that filters through into the clients working directly with AI.
So on that one, I think it'll be really interesting to see if the clients prefer the human touch or they prefer the AI, or actually that there's a kind of optimum mix between the two.
And I think in that there's also a part of the solution, or part of the position we'll get to, is that the buyers, the clients themselves, become more intelligent about how they're buying it and what they're buying and what they're asking for. And I suspect that over time, the clients will become more aware of the possibilities of AI and will start to ask for those services to be delivered instead of traditional human consultancy.
Just to continue that theme a little bit, I think you'll get to the point where if you don't have AI as part of your kind of consulting proposal, that can start to lose you work, because people and clients will be seeing the benefits from it and will want it as part of what they're bringing on.
The answer then is possibly not quite yet goodbye McKinsey. I think that what we've talked about is all sorts of areas that probably reflect more broadly into AI, the relationship between AI and business itself. But management consultancies will be around for a while and will survive for at least the next few years.
So goodbye McKinsey, hello McKinsey bot.
And on that thought, if you have any questions about what we're talking about, if you have any observations or anything you'd like us to talk about, please get in touch with us at ai@insightflow.io. That's AI, Adventures in AI, at insightflow.io. I've been Graham.
I've been Giles.
And I've been Rich.